Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to PMC's learning series for AIA accreditation, How to Subcontract Facility Scanning. This will be presented by Chris Mounts. He is the Director of Managed Technologies at PMC. I want to introduce myself too. I am Brian. I am with the marketing team as a marketing specialist. I will be handling any of the issues that you might have. I'll be in the background. If you have any questions, please utilize the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. That will allow you to open up a chat and ask questions to me. We will have a short Q&A session after. If there's anyone that has any questions for Chris after the training, please utilize that feature and Chris will address those questions. I also want to be sure to let you guys know about the AIA accreditation process. If you provided your AIA number upon registration, you will receive your AIA credits of, following the presentation. If you are not associated with AIA, you still will receive a registration or like a certificate for attending today's session. Apologies. So if you're not with AIA, don't worry, you can still get the ICU credits. But with that, I'd like to turn things over to Chris and he can begin on training. Chris, take it away.
Thanks, Brian. Yep. Yeah, and thanks everyone for attending today. So like Brian says, one of a series of classes that we offer, all focused around the kind of work that we do. This one in particular is how to contract facility scanning, building scanning. And we're going to go through that today, but there's a few others that we also offer as well that we put on from time to time. So to start out, just a little bit about PMC. Only take a minute here, but we've been around quite a while. We've done thousands of projects at this point in our history. We've been scanning in particular for over 20 years at this point. So we were one of the first companies out there that was performing laser scanning with some of the original equipment. And we've done, scans of all shapes and sizes over the year, from, absolutely gigantic projects to tiny projects and everywhere in between. We're located kind of all scattered throughout the world. In particular, we do a lot of manufacturing scanning in addition to architecture scanning. And to support that, we have teams and equipment in locations where people have factories. So what we do, right, we touch on this reality capture, which is kind of laser scanning, but nowadays it includes more than just laser scanning, any way to digitize the real world. We have an industrial engineering department here too. 3D modeling is something we do a tremendous amount of. It's just converting the point clouds into Revit models and AutoCAD files, as well as simulation and visualization groups. So here's our agenda today. We're going to start with a little bit about laser scanning. For any on the call that already know this and you're just interested in the subcontracting part, I apologize, but I think it's important to kind of set the ground framework for what we're going to talk about. Pitfalls for poor RFQs. We see a lot of those. And then some tips for subcontracting the projects on smaller projects. And then tips for subcontracting very large projects, because they're very different in sort of the level that you, as someone that would be seeking bids, would want to treat those differently. Okay. Jump right in and talk about a little bit about laser scanning. Okay. Like any process, right? Laser scanning sort of has the 4 parts. We're going to plan, and then we're going to execute the work, and then produce the outputs of the work. In our case, the execution of the work is broken into 2 distinct parts. That's the part that we're going to do on site. We're going to come into your location and capture the data. And then there's the registration part that's going to happen afterwards. And then finally, the outputs can include things like Revit modeling or just delivering the point cloud or anywhere in between. Okay. So in the planning phase, this is really critical. And, from experience here at PMC, when we don't do our thorough job planning jobs, this is where they go bad a lot. And this is an important step, right? And For us here at PMC over the years, through hard learned lessons, we have a very formal planning process. From as a person hiring the service out, a few things you should expect, right? You should expect a pretty formal plan of how they're going to come in and do this work. These people are going to show up at your facility or your customer's facility. You want to know the details of that. What are the logistics? How are they getting in? How are they getting out? Who are their on-site contacts? What's the plan? Are they gonna, if it's a smaller job, the plan can be very simple. We're coming in and, maybe this is a single family home where there's not a lot to talk about. We're gonna meet this person there that day and we're gonna complete the work. Larger projects, especially the very big ones, you're gonna want to talk about where the team will be on any given day through the schedule, what the schedule is, how many hours are going to be on site, how many hours a day they need to work, all those types of things. So once the team gets there, right, once we've got the plan and we arrive on site, a couple of things to consider. Scanners are line of sight. There's no such thing as large scale X-ray machines that can see through walls. All these things are visual laser light. They capture, even the photogrammetry, same thing. So that means you're gonna have to set up in multiple locations. So if it's a building with a lot of small rooms, they're gonna need to do scans in every single room. They're gonna need to open every single door. And this can be a challenge on some sites, right? So someone needs to be there with keys to open the doors. This is a pretty substantial problem for us that leads to a lot of extras on jobs, is when that part is not taken care of and we arrive on site and we're stuck waiting, in some cases hours for someone to show up with a key. This causes trips to get extended, extra days on site, and ultimately an extra charge back to you as the customer. So make sure, details like that are worked out. The other, thing in here is escorts. If it's for whatever reason, there's security issues, things like that on site, and it requires a full-time escort, that can slow things down. And if that's not discussed ahead of time, again, that can lead to an extra charge. Okay. So when we're on site for projects, defining a large project is a little difficult, but somewhere between, let's say, 25,000 to 100,000 square foot of space is where projects kind of fall into the larger category. And this is a different type of scanning work. It requires things like targets. For the largest jobs, it requires things like traditional survey control. And this is something to watch out for that we'll talk about a little later, that there's some companies out there that provide services that don't seem to understand this. But just know when they're on site, teams might be bringing other gear that needs to be set up in the site. In some cases, they need to install permanent benchmarks. These could be things like hidden nails somewhere, just some repeatable feature that they can get to. Especially if scanning is going to be repeated or broken up into multiple phases. We want to leave some kind of track that when we come back, we can pick up to where we left off and tie the data in correctly. On the smaller projects, though, kind of the complete opposite, right? These require no additional equipment. It will just be a scanner and a tripod that shows up. And those will provide perfectly good data quality at the end of the day. And like I said, it's sort of split into these two halves, the field work and then the office work with registration. This workflow can look different depending on the type of equipment used. And something I guess I haven't brought up is that what I've been talking about today is traditional terrestrial laser scanning. This is a scanner that's set up on a tripod and moved around. Nowadays, for us, our work is sort of half split between that traditional capture and mobile scanning techniques with wearable units where the data is captured in real time. In both cases, there is work to be done in the office. In the case of traditional terrestrial scanning, that work is quite a bit. And depending on the complexity of the job, you could expect several days of registration for every day on site. Again, smaller jobs, 1 day on site, 1 day of registration, they're a little different. Larger, more complicated jobs can take weeks, in some cases months, to get fully registered when they're absolutely massive projects. There's only so much we can do with computer equipment and speeding that up. So something to keep in mind. With the mobile scanning, this process is much faster. The registration is usually done in a day or two, almost regardless of job size until you get into the very large jobs. Hey, real quick note on outputs. This isn't really the focus of this today's discussion, right? This is really sort of where that today's discussion ends. Is we've captured scan data, and then you're going to do something with that. So the simplest would be that we're just going to provide you like RCS exports for anything Autodesk, or pod exports for MicroStation or any Siemens products. And that can be it, right? We scanned, we registered, we did a few exports, you're good to go. Or it can be more time-consuming deliverables like CAD and BIM development. And a thing to keep in mind there that sometimes trips people up is these scans can look like photographs. They look very good, but they are not CAD models. There's only so much you can do with a scan when you ultimately have to produce some kind of deliverable out the other end, right? Most of the time we're brought in because there's a project underway, and the drawings that you'll need to create for your project will likely require CAD or BIM development from the point cloud, and that's ultimately tracing. There's some tools that speed this up that semi-automate it, but it is, at the end of the day, tracing over top of the points with CAD geometry. Well, lastly, there's some different types of reports and analysis that can be done with the point clouds. Whether that's an elevation heat map, floor flatness studies, all types of things that can be done nowadays with the point clouds. That will jump into our next section here, which is pitfalls of poor RFQs. This is usually, where things can start to go south on a project, is right at this stage. So, why, we have experience in this. We respond to about 300 RFQs per year, give or take. And they come from every size company. The majority of these have, little or no measurable requirements to them other than just a cost. Just give us a cost to do this work. And a lot lack even the most basic information on the building, exactly what they want captured. And so for us, we've actually developed a questionnaire we send out to people. Over the years, it's gotten a little lengthy. We try to keep it as short as possible, but we need to know what you're going to do with this data, how it's going to be used, downstream. What are your objectives of getting this project done? Because that's going to feed back into how we produce the quotes, right? How much time we need to spend, how many scans, let's say per 1,000 square feet are we going to do? What kind of settings we need to run on the equipment. Is mobile equipment a viable solution? Is it not? Mobile equipment can cut the price of these jobs about in half, but you sacrifice some quality to get there. Can we use photogrammetry, especially for outside work? What kind of accuracy do you need on the roof? All these types of things. And we'd be happy to share that questionnaire with anyone that would like to see a copy of it after this presentation. Just reach out to Brian or myself, and we can get that out to you. At the absolute minimum, we need to understand what you're going to do with this data and how it's going to be used, and some basics about the building. We understand that, sometimes there just isn't data that exists for the building, and we have to go into Google Earth or do other real estate lookup tools to figure out even what the size of this building is. We certainly hope, someone on your team has at least been in this building and can talk about it a little bit. If it's something we're familiar with, houses, commercial real estate, things like that, we have a pretty good idea. If you say, yeah, this is a pretty typical retail space and it's 15,000 square feet, we can probably get you a bid based on that, and knowing what you want to do with it, right? You want to produce construction documents, or you want to use this for operational data, or this is backup for a potential lawsuit and you want the construction documented as is, right? We need to know those kind of things before we jump into this, right? So, some examples of things, where we've seen where bad RFQs have led to some really strange outcomes. The first one, we bid on a really large industrial project, somewhere around 1 million square feet. It was an automotive paint shop. And we've done a fair amount. We've probably over the years done 24 automotive paint shops. So we have a pretty good idea of what we're bidding. And we submitted our bid, and we got a response from the client that our bid was completely out of line from the other bid. They only collected 2 bids from the other bid they got because we were beat by 90%. And we just could not begin to wrap our head around how that could be possible, right? We are almost always the most competitive pricing. Occasionally we get beat, right? It's hard to compete with everyone all the time. But when this came up, the purchasing agent didn't really want to talk with us much more than that until we found out a couple months later what happened. So the reason we got beat is that someone went in with some of the earliest generations of mobile equipment, did absolutely no control on the site, right? When you do 1 million square foot, you have to run traditional survey control, whether it's mobile scanning or traditional scanning. If you don't, your data will be bad, guaranteed. And so we've been doing this a long time, and I can speak from very personal experience that control is a must on very large projects. And end of the day, what happened on that job is that the data was useless. It could not be used. It set the project way behind. And anyone who really knows much about laser scanning could have told them that that was going to be the outcome, right? And so the lesson learned here is if you see massive discrepancies in the bid, you should start asking questions about why. Okay. On another one, we actually got a call from a company, and they wanted a bid to scan the Smithsonian Natural History Museum in DC. And we put our bid together, not knowing any of the story behind this, and we submitted the bid to the customer, and then had a follow-up meeting with them. This is another very large project. Natural History Museum, it's not just the part you see, there's a lot of parts you don't see, including multiple sub-levels and things like that. And in this meeting, what was discussed was that the whole reason they had reached out to us is they had hired someone to do this work. That company had gotten part of the way through and came back to them and asked to double what they were being paid, or they were going to stop work on the job. Again, this is a lesson learned here of one, try to get multiple bids, to see what's going on. And then when you get bids that are out of line, that don't seem to align, or there's a huge discrepancy, find out what's going on. And so in this case, what they did is they asked this person that was out there doing the work, because in all of our bids, we're going to tell you how many scans we think we're going to do. And so they had our numbers. They went back to that supplier and asked how many scans they thought they were going to do. And even at the revised number, they were still half the number of scans that we were going to do on the job. Right. And this just raises all kinds of red flags, right? You can be off by 10 or 20% because maybe we disagree on the specific techniques of how to capture the space. But if I'm coming in and I'm saying we're going to do 4,700 scans, and someone else comes in and says we're going to do 2,000, that's going to have a real impact on the data you get, right? Because like we talked about before, these are line of sight, right? And what it could say is that maybe we totally misunderstood what you wanted to get from this data. Maybe we didn't understand the scope. Maybe we didn't understand the space. But it's something where you should have a discussion with the vendors, with the bidders, to figure out why you're seeing these discrepancies. And we'll talk a little bit, right? You should always ask to basic information. How many scans are you going to do on this project, right? Because right off the bat, that will tell you, that should tie and correlate almost exactly with cost, right? How much time the people think they're going to spend at your site, and ultimately the data you're going to get. And then the last one, that we see just over and over and over again is companies that think they can go scan any size job out there and not do survey and not use targets. It just guaranteed these jobs are not going to go well. There's very, very basic trig math involved in this, that if you have a certain amount of error between scan to scan, as that project gets bigger, that error multiplies out, right? And so the small projects, 100% fine. We can do what's called cloud to cloud registration. And we do a ton of this. It's probably half the work we do at PMC. So I am by no means anti cloud to cloud scanning. But as those jobs get bigger, you have to do at first targets. So you can do targets without survey. And what targets do is allow you to extend that error. So instead of the error being one scan to the next scan, we maybe see the same target with 4 or 5 scans, and then we are able to average out the error between those 4 or 5 scans and get tighter data registration. As it gets larger, right, that even 4 to 5 scan groupings or whatever that can see some common targets is not good enough. And that's where you have to go to traditional survey control. Because in here, we're shooting points 1,000 up to 2,000 feet away. And knowing that those points are good, and we're building, in some cases, huge mesh networks of survey control. And this is how you get really high quality data, sub-millimeter accuracy on 1 million, 2 million, 4 million square foot sites. If you don't do this, let's say it's 100,000 square foot site and you go in cloud to cloud, I would, even if the scanning was done perfectly as far as you can with cloud to cloud, you'd be talking data that I would trust to probably plus or minus a foot or two at the far outreaches. In other words, if you measured the overall scope area, I wouldn't trust it to within 1 or 2 feet at 100,000 square feet. If you use targets on 100,000 square feet, you can probably get that pretty tight. If you know what you're doing and you do proper targeting technique, you could probably get that down to plus minus a couple inches with just using targets. If you then apply surveying to that, you're going to be within a couple millimeter accuracy on your final data. Even if the surveying was a little sloppy and not perfect, you're still going to have some pretty tight data. So we're going to start with a little discussion on some tips, based on what we see. A lot of this, we've already kind of discussed a little bit here, but clearly define your scope area. It doesn't have to be anything really detailed. We tell people in the perfect world for this, we'd like to know the square footage of the scope area. we would like to have some sort of drawing of the scope area if it exists. Sometimes it can be a photo taken of like a fire evacuation plan that's up on the wall. Anything that just gives us a general idea of what's going on inside of your building, because things like the how many rooms and how broken up it is do have an effect when we cost this out. And then again, in a perfect world, some pictures of the scope area. Okay. Most projects fall into this basic set of requirements that are, we know what you want, right? You're going to do some downstream project work. You're developing a bid set or construction documents from this. Maybe you're an architect. We have a pretty good idea what you need, but we'll still talk through it. But some projects have some unique things going on. And some have some very special items to consider. So a lot of the stuff we get called into, right, could pose safety hazards to our team. And on our team, we will 100% walk off your site if we show up there and it's obvious that there's things like unabated asbestos. My people they know how to recognize it and they will leave. So we've got to talk about that stuff ahead of time. Other things can be, confined spaces that are difficult to get into, locked doors. These types of things have to be talked about ahead of time. If there's structural damage to the building, we've got to talk about that ahead of time. Again, all this stuff we can share the questionnaire that we send out. And there's not a ton of these items, right? But we have to talk about it. And it can be some basic stuff, right? Like on larger jobs, if it's an abandoned building and there's no working bathrooms, that's a problem, right? Because now our guys a couple times a day need to get into their cars and go drive somewhere. And this can get complicated, right? Is there power so that we can charge the batteries, those types of things. These are all the basic questions that we need to go through. But the same token, if we jump on Google Maps and we see that this is a occupied operational building, we can take care of it with just a PDF, some photos, and a square footage. All right, we know what you need in most cases. Another one to consider is, does it include above drop ceiling scanning? And just so you know, when you add above drop ceilings to the scanning, it will at least double the cost per square foot. If you get a quote that isn't that, you got a problem. It should at least double the cost. But I know, especially if you're in the mechanical MEP business, this can be very, very important, right? And we know how to do this. We do it really well, but there's just no doubt double, and in some cases more, the base cost per square foot will increase. So definitely something that needs to be discussed. Okay. I say put some quantifiable objectives in your requests. Basic things like how many scans are you going to do, what scanner settings are you going to use, a high level schedule at least, right? How long are they going to be on there? And tell you, right now we're facing a challenge that we're really busy. So, lead time can be a discussion. How soon can you get people on site? A quality report. All the registration software puts this out now, or some kind of sample of the work that you're going to get. Again, this is very important as projects get larger. A little less important on small ones. You can request an explanation of their quality control process. Again, if the project's of any kind of substantial size, you're going to want to know that. And then, put in there, one of the things that we love to see in the RFQs is if you've done this before and you had things that worked well for you, or you had things that didn't work well for you, put those in the RFQ, past experiences you've had with other scanning companies, and how it worked out, so that we can, take that and either fix the problems or build on the successes of it. So if if you have concerns, maybe you've had some jobs in the past that didn't go well, some stuff you could request, right? You could get a map of where they intend to do the scans, right? These maps take a little bit of time to produce, but not a ton. As an example, one on the right, uh, but it can really help to identify any shortcomings of, what your expectations were. So if you look at the map on the right, exterior was not in scope, right? And once you get that scan map, it's going to be pretty clear if you thought it was in scope and we didn't. Well, now you know that there was a discrepancy here. The scanner settings, proof of any certifications that the teams have, training, safety training, those types of things. A copy of their quality assurance plan. Any larger scanning companies out there will have this. References. We certainly have them, but I'd ask that, especially if you want to do business with some of the smaller companies out there, they're going to have a hard time giving you references and in some cases example projects, because I tell you nowadays, it seems like, 70% of the work we do comes with a NDA that we have to sign. And those NDAs restrict us from sharing almost anything about the project with anyone. But if you're working with larger firms, over the years, we certainly have accumulated examples that we can share. We have a whole library of stuff that's available to look at. We have some of it's publicly available. And we have references based on your specific market, right? If you're in healthcare or retail or whatever, we have references that we can give you for that to check. But these kind of requests are going to limit, who's going to bid on your work. You're going to push out a lot of the smaller bidders because they're not necessarily going to be able to meet all these things. Be clear on your deliverables. What do you really want? Again, this sort of is derived from that discussion of what is your end output that you're doing on this project. Consult with on larger project teams. This gets people caught a lot. Talk to the other members on the team to see what they need out of the data. Right. And in some cases, you can get them to foot the bill for some of this, right? You can pull in the other subs on the project and contribute to paying, to get the work done. Be careful not to over ask, right? Don't think that, well, we want the highest scanner settings and the most scans and we want top everything. Well, that's great, but it's going to come at a cost, and it's going to be maybe the data is really big and hard to work with. Watch out for alternates, right? When people propose things. Lately, we've seen a couple Matterport quotes slip in. And just really important. I mean, PMC does Matterport work. It's not scanning, right? It's just not. It's something totally different. It has its purpose. I like it a lot for what it is, but you're not, especially if the building's of any reasonable size, you are not going to get project ready point cloud data out of a Matterport. And so just keep that in mind, right? Watch out for, one, if that bid comes in really low, and two, if people put strange alternates. There's also some weird scanning gear on the market. So just watch out, right? That someone hasn't slipped something in there and you're not getting something that you can't use. And then, lastly, don't forget to forward and enforce any of your contractual requirements, right? So maybe you are under an NDA that you need to pass on to us. If you have insurance requirements, especially every now and then we run into people that have really weird insurance requirements. We need to know about that ahead of time. Of course, we carry the basics, but if you have some strange riders on the insurance because your customer is forcing you to do it, we just need to know that ahead of time. If it's the basic stuff, we don't need to know ahead of time. We'll just take care of it. But if it's anything out of the ordinary, we always tell people, if something on this job is out of the ordinary to you, we need to know about it too, because it's going to be strange for us as well. Some stuff to expect. So, again, we're just talking scanning. So the price to scan can vary kind of all over the map. It really just depends on how large the scan project is. Like I was saying, if it's mobile scanning versus terrestrial scanning, when you get into the 4 cents and in some cases even lower than that, we're talking very, very large mobile scanning work is where you're going to see that price point. For most normal work, you're going to be somewhere in the middle of this range, right? The 10 to 15 cents a square foot for scanning. And that's going to get you a scanning deliverable, right? Those RCS exports, something like that. It's going to cover all the field work and the RCS exports. Right? Processing can take time, right? Like I was saying, and a lot of time. So allocate for that. This process, the worst case scenario is on very large projects that get all the way to the final deliverable state and a quality mistake happens. We have to go all the way back to the beginning to fix that in a lot of cases. And that can cost days, if not weeks of time. So we're really careful on that. We try to, everyone's always in a rush nowadays, but we try to not rush this process. We have different quality control gates that things go through. It still happens on occasion. Mistakes obviously happen. I see a good subcontractor will deliver, high quality data on time most of the time, right? I wish I could say that at PMC we never made mistakes. We do. Things happen. And I guess, one of the things I say is a good subcontractor will fix it, right? We will, if we screw something up, if something got missed on site, we will go back at no extra cost if it was our fault, and we will fix the problem. We know in some cases, right, this doesn't fix everything because there's timing issues and all that play as well. But a good subcontractor, I would say we're somewhere around, 95% plus of the work we do gets delivered on time, per the schedule, and it's of, really high quality. So, we talked a little on large projects, and it's hard to define exactly when a project becomes large, right? It's sort of a gradient that as they get larger, different techniques stop working as well, and you start losing control on the accuracy of the site. But at some point, these things get big. And big projects, right? The million square foot and up, if that's the kind of business you're in, you need to do a lot more to make sure that you're fully qualifying your supply base when it comes to this kind of stuff. So, projects where, you could expect the scanning cost to come in at, 50,000 or more, you can consider using the full US IBD. US IBD is the trade group for the work we do. This is the US Institute of Building Documentation, and they have a whole request form that is exceptionally detailed. But if you have a very large project, right, it can make sense to spend the hours to really detail out what you need, to scope out, maybe different settings, parts of the scope. This area we need higher level of detail, this area we need lighter detail. When it's a small project, this just isn't worth it. Sometimes we get this document for small projects and we don't really look at it because trying to micromanage a smaller project has done nothing but cause problems. We just go out there, we capture the whole thing completely. And we can do a little bit more in the modeling side of the business as far as what we do and don't do. On a larger, if it's a new firm you haven't worked with before and it's a large project, not only get the references, but verify the references, right? Call, check. if, there's got to be in the US maybe a couple thousand companies that do laser scanning at this point. Of those, the ones that I personally would trust to do million square foot projects is probably less than 20. We're going to consistently get good data from them. It's going to be, on time. It's going to be what you need. The problem is there's just obviously a lot of companies out there scanning, and they just don't know how to do large projects. Large are just different. The way you manage the data, a lot of companies won't even have the capacity on their internal networks to deal with the volume of data that's coming in, right? On these mega projects, we just finished one that was 4 million square feet, and I think it was 10 terabytes of scan data over that 4 million square feet, right? Smaller companies just simply don't have a means to work with that kind of data, let alone make sure it's protected and they're backing it up and all that. So get those references, verify those references, again, on the big projects. Proof of a documented quality assurance plan, right? They should be able to give you a PDF of their quality plan. If they can't, that's probably a red flag, right? That they don't do large work. And lastly, you're going to want to see proof of what do they got going on their back end. Do they got data security in place? Do they have proper backup and archiving procedures? Right. The last thing you want to do is get a call from them and they tell you that they had all your data on some cheap USB drive that crapped out and now they've lost your entire project. I've heard stories of that happening. Proper data backup costs a lot of money. And not all companies spend that money accordingly. I hope this was helpful. I think again, especially if you have large projects, there's a lot to talk about here, and we're happy to talk outside of this presentation on that. I know it's a relatively small group of people that work on projects of this size. But with that, that's all I really had to present to you today. Hopefully it was interesting. Hopefully everyone learned something. I don't know if we have any questions, Brian.
Yeah, Chris, we did have several questions that came in. A lot of them were interested in the questionnaire. So we'll work out that offline to get the people that were requesting it access to that.
Okay.
But we did have other questions that came in. We'll get started with those. So the first question we had, Chris, was, can you turn the scan into an ArchiCAD model?
We do not. We can give you an IFC file, but we don't currently have people that use ArchiCAD at PMC.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Another question that we had is, what is a point cloud?
So the point cloud is literally what the name says. It's a bunch of points. And so maybe I guess I skimmed over that in the scanning talk, right? But laser scanners, photogrammetry is different, but laser scanners actually emit a laser beam that goes out and measures the point that laser hits. That point's recorded. It's recorded into the individual scan. And then that individual scan is registered together to create the point cloud, which could contain, upwards of billions of individual measured points. And why that matters at all is because that's not the kind of thing that you can just natively use in a CAD program to develop like construction documents, right? You can reference it in and you can do different images and stuff and integrate it. And we are big proponents of doing that, but it's not the same thing as a CAD document.
All right, thank you, Chris.
Yep.
Another question we had, can you match the output model base point with civil survey base point?
This is a huge topic, and we to the point where we have an entire separate class on this. think it's called like Where in the World Are My Point Clouds? The short answer is absolutely, we can do that. There's some limitations. So in a lot of cases, what the core of the problem is that the civil team and the building design team are working on two different coordinate planes. Point clouds, once they're exported to RCS, can only support a single coordinate system. And so what we can do is in our software that we're running our point clouds in, we have multiple coordinate
Hey,
systems.
Ben, your input was really, really helpful. And
Gary, please mute yourself.
sorry.
Yeah, so there's multiple coordinate systems in there. We can create multiple exports for the team that are on different coordinate systems. Also we can work with shared coordinates within Revit and a lot of different things to make it work. But this is a big topic of discussion because, like we were saying, with mistakes causing problems downstream, we don't ever want to change the coordinate system of a point cloud after we output the point cloud. That's a huge amount of work.
All right, thank you, Chris. Another question we had, it's kind of a lengthy one, so bear with me. I'll read it slow for you. How do you decide which registration strategy to use, cloud to cloud, target, survey controls, in larger projects that are broken up? And then it has a follow-up question of, do you have a recommended dimension that you look for before you move to the next level of control?
So, yeah, I mean, how we decide, like I say, this is such a difficult one, and I wish there were hard and fast answers. It really can vary, right? It varies on different sites. For example, warehouses are awful to do with cloud to cloud. And I would only do cloud to cloud on the smallest warehouse imaginable. And even then I might not. I would probably at least do targets. That said, when it's maybe a complicated commercial space, you can go pretty large and get by with cloud to cloud, certainly up into the 50,000 square foot range and get, I would say, acceptable accuracy, right? And so what you have is, as it gets bigger, it's not going to suddenly immediately fail. If you try to do cloud to cloud on a 10 million square foot space, it's going to fail completely. But as you get larger, it's not going to immediately fail. What's going to happen is your quality is going to start to slip, and your ability to connect one scan to the next is going to start to get distorted, and you're going to start seeing separations. And so this is a discussion of what type of space it is and what's acceptable quality. On the highest end jobs we do that are large, where there's a hard requirement for millimeter level accuracy, just without a doubt, you're not getting that with anything other than a huge amount of survey work, permanent benchmarking, and targets on top of that. But with just targets, you can get to some pretty good sized buildings. You can do 100,000 square foot plus and have it be adequate for let's say an architectural design team.
All right, thank you, Chris. Another question we had, can you provide some examples of certifications of note?
So the biggest ones that we get would be would always be the safety ones, right? Are these people certified to do confined space? Are they certified for lockout, tagout? Those are the number one requests we get for certifications. Others, that we get, they maybe want to see our OSHA documentation reports. I guess that is still safety, but it's a little different. And then they want to see maybe proof that our team is adequately trained in the equipment. They've been through different training classes and things. Just some kind of proof they know what they're doing. And could even be they want to see resumes of the team, right? They want to know how many years they've been scanning, that kind of thing.
All right, thank you, Chris. Another question we had is a hypothetical. It says ballpark cost idea for creating a Revit drawing of a 3,000 square foot house and for data in other formats. That might be an offline answer, I think.
Oh, no, I mean, we do a fair amount of this work. It would be, depending on the complexity of the building, the scanning and Revit would add up to between, $2,000 and $3,000.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Chris. And it looks like we have one last question here, and it says, oh, never mind. Another one popped in, but the next question is, could you talk more about the US IBD?
Yeah, I mean, so we're a member of it. I do think it's important, whatever your business is, to support your trade groups. They do a lot of work in this, and a lot of the hard quantifiable work to really help prove it out. And like I said, on the bigger projects, I think their documentation for scoping is really good and worth the time. It's just not worth it on the smaller ones, because it is just a lot of detail. But I think it's a pretty good group. And they say that to me, the big thing is that they're doing, scanner comparison testing and really helping distill down, the language and vocabulary of how to talk about accuracy. We have some other classes that dive a little deeper into that, where I've really kind of leveraged, some of what they've developed over the years to help people understand, scoping projects to be what you need them to be. Right? Not all scanning should be the same. It should vary based on the project outcomes. And they've done a lot of work, I think, in helping give at least a common language to that.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And I think this is the last question. Never mind. Anyway, I actually like this question. So it says, how do you deal with a 500-foot tall tower to scan the exterior facade?
Oh, so I guess it would depend if it's a building or a like a cell tower kind of thing, or communication tower. For buildings, I can tell you we use almost exclusively photogrammetry up at those kind of heights now. There's some cases where you can't do that and things can get really complicated. There are scanners on the market, the Leica, the high end, not the cheap Leicas, but the high end Leicas, that can get data at those kind of distances that I would trust. I wouldn't trust any other machine on the market for sure, but you can trust those at that kind of distance, but you start losing line of sight when you get up that high. And so it basically, long story short, I sure hope photogrammetry works, or this gets really complicated and could be really expensive. And again, that, I guess that does apply to both building facades and communication type towers. On the communication towers, though, we really need to understand what the goal is of the data capture on that. Oftentimes, just video shot with drones is sufficient. Again, if they need high accuracy point cloud data at the top of that tower, we're going to be looking at the Leica machines to get up that high.
All right, thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
And the last question we have is, do you have an office in New England? And I believe we don't.
No, correct. Yeah, we do not.
All right, with that, I'm going to close the Q&A session. Oh, never mind. Another question popped in.
Okay.
Can you talk about the differences between Matterport and laser scanning and when you would use either?
Yeah, I could elaborate on that a little bit. So in my mind, they just fill two different markets. And I'll use an example case of where I think the two have been applied extremely well. We have a large automotive client that we work with. And what they've done is they've deployed Matterports into all of their factories. And when a new project gets announced, the same day or week that project gets announced, the Matterport gets taken out and captures that scope area. And then those virtual walkthroughs and virtual tours are made available within 24 hours, right? And that's great for the project team to get a head start. But then they come back through later with the laser scanners to capture the data that the engineering teams are going to need, right? It's a difference of, they're just, to me, they're very different markets. So the Matterport is really great. It's sort of that virtual tour, conceptualizing, visualizing the space kind of workflow. If you need to do, actual design and engineering work, it's really not going to be accurate enough for you, right? You're going to have problems. The data is going to be kind of distorted. There's one of the things that troubles me the most about it is there's no back check, right? There's no way to know that the data you captured is actually remotely accurate or not. It can look very accurate, and this is for all photogrammetry solutions, which I'd put Matterport into, even though I know it does a little more than that, but I would still consider a photogrammetry solution. There's no way to back check that data. There's no way to know that it's not off by a foot. It looks perfectly good, but it's just shifted by a foot, and there's no way to tell that. So I guess to sum up, they're different types of things for different constituents on a job, right? The Matterport's awesome at digital walkthroughs, virtual walkthroughs, and conceptual planning. And then when you get to the real execution, the design phase, the engineering phase, that's where the laser scanning comes in, where you're going to need that higher level of accuracy. And you can capture more data in different spots in different ways with scanners than you can with Matterports as well. And then on top of all of that, right, if you go to Matterport's site, I know people are out there doing some crazy stuff with Matterports, but their official stance is that their technology is only good up to 20,000 or 25,000 square feet. So, I mean, on their site, they specifically tell you not to do jobs that exceed that. And then you can get into some weirdness of chopping it up into pieces and all this, but you're just going to create more and more problems with your data quality. Whereas traditional scanning done right, it's just going to work, right? 100% of the time, every time, right? I can tell you right now, we have 3 active projects that are going on where we are replacing Matterport data because it caused problems, either in the design phase or construction phase, because the teams tried to use it for something that it just is not for.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Yep.
I don't see any further questions coming in. Do you have a contact slide, or if you don't, I'd recommend, sharing your, okay, there we go. But with that, that'll close the Q&A session. Thank you, Chris, for answering all those questions. It was great to see all the interactivity amongst the people that came. So thank you guys for that as well. For schedule of upcoming topics, if you'd like to keep up with what PMC is presenting, I recommend going to our website at www.pmcorp.com. We have a resources tab that showcases our webinars and upcoming trainings. Be on the lookout for another future training with Chris. Also, this presentation was being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube. We had a couple people ask about slides. So if you want to check out the slides, we're going to upload a YouTube video. So if you want to share it or like that, look at the slides again or share it amongst your colleagues, it'll be up on our YouTube channel. To find us on YouTube, our YouTube channel is PMC Videos, all capital, videos right on the end with an S. So PMC Videos for other topics you might want to be looking at as well. But that will conclude today's presentation. Before we go, I do want to remind people of the AIA accreditation process. If you provided your AIA number upon registration, you will receive credit for attending today's session. Also, if you do not are not affiliated with AIA, you will get CEUs via a certificate that will be sent to you later via email. So if you have any questions also outside of Chris, if you want to contact me directly for the process of that, my email has been in the the Q&A part a couple of times, but it's bhubs@pmcorp.com if you want to reach out to me directly. But with that, that will close today's meeting, and I hope you all have a great day.